Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for a webinar this morning to talk about a very pressing issue. My name is Jolene Littlejohn. I am the coordinator for the Oregon Invasive Species Council. I'm going to be kind of the stealth person in the background here, helping to move this along. And I'm pleased to be here with Chris Hedstrom and Wyatt Williams. Unfortunately, Meg Robbie was unable to join us today because of the government shutdown. But we will be covering some very important topics that she was hoping to bring forward today. Particularly forest and agricultural pests are a pressing issue for the state of Oregon that many people are well aware of. But when pests become invasive and become rampant, they are putting real pressure on Oregon's industries with risk of lost profit, costly control projects, and quarantines. And so we're here to talk about some emerging invasive insect threats that could cause significant lasting impact to the state. And it really takes a collaborative effort to address the issue. We're going to hear about a number of things today about what state agencies and federal agencies are doing to address the problem and what we can do to support this issue. So I'm going to let Chris and Wyatt introduce themselves and get us started today. Please note that we will be taking questions you can type questions into the box on your screen. We'll try to get to 1 to 2 questions during the webinar as we go and have an extra half an hour of question and answer period at the end to try to get to as many as possible. Please send them in, and anything that we don't get to, we'll try to answer and reflect on the website for following the webinar. So thank you all, and here we go. Chris and Wyatt, please take us off.
Well, for introductions, thank you for joining us today. My name is Wyatt Williams, and I'm the Invasive Species Specialist for Oregon Department of Forestry, and I'm very pleased to be with you today.
Good morning. I'm Chris Hedstrom, entomologist for Oregon Department of Agriculture. Going to cover a couple of pests that we work on in the state to try to eradicate and survey for this hour. So hopefully you guys are seeing a screen right now that says Emerging Insect Pests, Threats to Oregon's Agriculture, Forest, and Plant Trade. So this hour, what we want to do is sort of give an introduction. What are the threats and what are we doing about them as state agencies, as the Oregon Department of Agriculture, Oregon Department of Forestry, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture, APHIS PPQ. The major pests that we're going to talk about today and some that threaten Oregon are the Japanese beetle, gypsy moth, spotter and lanternfly, which is one that we haven't detected in Oregon yet, but are certainly on the lookout for, and also emerald ash borer, which is a major forest pest in the United States. At the end, we'll have some conclusions and sort of takeaway messages, and also ways that you might be able to help, whether you're a grower or part of an industry group, part of another agency that can offer support. Certainly, this is not while we take on the responsibility to protect Oregon from these different pests, it's every Oregonian's responsibility to stop invasive species. And there's lots of different ways that if we pool our resources and pool our smarts, we can help beat some of these things. Before we get into it, though, I want to talk about some definitions. A lot of people throw around these two definitions, invasive and exotic, with a lot of insects and things that are introduced into the state. And there are very specific definitions for both of these. Exotic species are really any non-native or introduced species into the state. They're not always necessarily a pest. And there are lots of pathways for different exotic species to get into the state, some purposefully. And for example, Tyria jacobi, the cinnabar moth, is not a parasitoid, but a biological control agent introduced for tansy ragwort. So an exotic species, but not a pest, actually one that is beneficial. Invasive species are different. Those are all exotic species that have the potential to cause environmental or economic harm in the new area that they've been introduced. And this is a definition that's actually been set at the state level in terms of putting together the legislature and other policy to be able to battle invasive species. If you're familiar with brown marmorated stink bug, certainly it's an invasive species in the United States, more recently in Oregon. It has the potential to not only reduce biodiversity by outcompeting native stink bugs, but also to cause damage and also be a nuisance pest. Invasive species really affect all Oregonians. This is not just a forestry pest or an agricultural thing. All Oregonians are affected by invasive species. Industries can suffer economic damage. Residents can see decreased property value and quality of life, like the picture above showing brown marmorated stink bug in Maryland. They're literally sweep sweep grooming brown marmoset stink bugs off of the deck there. Certainly that dog doesn't look very happy about it. Natural resources are also affected. Parks, natural areas, and wilderness areas can be overtaken by things such as Cape ivy in the lower picture there, which also affects biodiversity. When native species can't compete with these invasive species because the evolved and natural checks and balances that have been sort of evolved over time aren't there, these invasive species can run rampant. So biodiversity suffers as a result. Bottom line is there are a lot of different ways for things to get into the state, whether it's vehicles, planes carrying cargo, vehicles carrying cargo, ships from overseas, boats carrying invasive mussels, railroads carrying seeds, or people just with weed seeds attached to them, bringing goods in from other states. One of the more recent ones that we're dealing with is people moving from out of state from infested areas, bringing with them stuff in their backyard or potted plants with them. It's one that people don't really think about, but certainly can be an issue, and we're seeing that right now. This is a complicated graph, but I'll walk you through it quickly. Basically, we call this the invasive species curve. So as you can see on the left, there's invasive infestation area increasing. On the right with that is management costs, and on the x-axis over time. So one of the things that we really focus on is prevention, making sure that invasive species don't get into the state. And so infestation areas and management costs are low. The next step, if things are able to establish, is eradication. That's before things can establish. We try to get rid of that population before it becomes a problem. And we're working that right now with Japanese beetle that I'll get into, and we've worked in the past on gypsy moth. If that fails, we go into containment, trying to keep it in one place. And if that fails as well, then we go into resource protection and long-term management. As you can see, that's where the infestation rate is very high, and management costs are also very high. So as these two things increase, they increase together over time. And that's what we're trying to prevent. We're trying to stay on the low, no population prevention area. So that's it for the intro and sort of the things that we're going to talk about, just to lay some groundwork and some definitions about where we're going with the talk today. I'm going to move right into my presentation about Japanese beetle to talk to you about a major threat to agriculture and all Oregonians in terms of nursery and also specialty crops and as a nuisance pest. So Japanese beetle is a pest. Papillia japonica is the species name. It's a pest that's been established in the eastern United States for nearly a century now, or maybe a little bit over a century. And it's a major pest or a potential pest of ornamental plants, turf grass, hops, and wine grapes, as well as many other different crops and specialty crops. It has 300 known host plants that the adults feed on, and the grubs are a major turf pest by feeding on grass roots. Like I said, it was first detected in the United States in 1916, and Oregon's been surveying and eradicating for the past 6 decades, starting with plane inspections many years ago and moving into trapping statewide. The USDA estimates that annually $460 million are spent annually to control this pest where it is established. ODA conservatively estimates that $45.5 million would be spent if it's to establish in Oregon, but that doesn't include things like schools and parks and residences that would be spending money to combat this, but also seeing damage in terms of school fields and sports fields. This is an image. If you're not familiar with this pest, if you are familiar with this pest, this is going to be a very familiar image. Basically, in the summer, these adults get together, mate, feed on flowers right down to the stems, and defoliate leaves. They aggregate to cause widespread damage and literally can devastate a garden within a day or two. Imagine if this was nursery stock, how they'd be devastating it as well. This is a picture of some grapevines that were skeletonized by Japanese beetle adults. This is one of our main concerns for Oregon, as the wine industry is huge here, and also a point of pride, so some cultural pride there. If this were established, wine grapes would have to deal with a brand new pest, increasing pesticide use in those areas. And then one of the other major concerns is that the grubs seen there on the right and the damage they cause on the left, these things can devastate golf courses, sports fields, schools, parks, any turf. So homeowner value would go down, school value would go down, golf courses. All this would lead to increased pesticide use throughout the state and lost yield. So the Japanese beetle program in Oregon has generally consisted of annual trapping. Each adult flight season, we put traps in high-risk areas throughout the state. The most frequent pathway that we see is through plane inspections and cargo. However, plane inspections are no longer done. We trap at the airport to detect what's what's brought in over there. And we detect them there annually. We find a handful of beetles always at Portland International Airport, and we treat the turf there in order to combat those populations and keep them from spreading. When I say it's detected, we eradicate. Like I said, frequent detections at PDX, but we've had 3 large eradications outside of the area since 1988, including the current one in Washington County. And these treatments for eradication consist of ground and foliar treatments. I'll go into some detail about that next. So currently, I'll briefly go over this. It is a huge project. I could spend the whole hour talking about Japanese beetle eradication, but I just want to catch you up on sort of what the current situation is. So a little bit of background. In summer 2016, we detected 369 beetles just west of Portland. That upper image there shows the red area, Cedar Mill, where we found these 370 beetles just north of Beaverton, west of Portland. That was a lot of beetles. 369 beetles is more than we'd found over the last 20 years combined. So while it doesn't sound like a lot, it is a lot of beetles for what we detect in the state. So that triggered an eradication program. So in spring of 2017, we drew a treatment boundary and treated 2,100 residences, school fields, and parks with a granular insecticide to try to prevent the next generation of larvae from turning into adults in 2018. Unfortunately, in summer 2017, we also, with our traps, detected 23,000 beetles that next year. So the first year, that 369, that was not indicative of what was actually going on in the area. And so our 23,000 beetles became a much bigger project. We did treat in 2017. That doesn't have any effect on that 23,000. The treatment affects the next generation, but certainly we had a bigger project on our hands. So in 2018, we expanded our treatment area. We treated 5,800 households over 2,200 acres, 5 schools, parks, and a golf course at this point. And we detected beetles in the area on plants and in our traps. So summer 2018, our detection, we found 17,400 beetles. This is a result of that 2017 treatment. So we had a 34% reduction rate in our trap count, which is good. We're heading in the right direction, and we made a little bit of a dent in that population, but we really need to step it up and do more if we're going to eradicate this. So in spring of 2019, we've actually proposed treatment of 8,300 households based on where we found beetles. And that bottom map, although it's a small map, shows all the detections of beetles we had in 2019 in that area. The red boundary shows the treatment area for 2018. 2019 will encompass almost all of those blue circles and dots to try to treat this and get a handle on it before it can get absolutely out of control. It's 3,200 acres. Part of the challenge is that we need consent from each of the homeowners in those areas to be able to treat. That we're starting right now for 2019. We were able to pull it off last year, and we're confident we'll be able to do it again this year. 2020 will really tell the story as to whether or not the eradication is working or not. But what I want to emphasize here is what does it mean to industry and what does it mean to residents if we fail? So immediately, as part of the National Plant Board Japanese Beetle Harmonization Plan, and this guidebook is available online if you search for harmonization plan, it's sort of the rules that are set up for places where Japanese beetle is infesting or already infested for places that are going to export nursery stock. So the picture above shows Monrovia in Dayton. It's one of Oregon's largest nurseries, if not the largest. They're not in Washington County, but if this thing were to spread, they would be under immediate restrictions about being able to send plants out of the state. The map on the bottom kind of breaks down how this works. Those green states are ones that are infested with Japanese beetle. They can basically send without restriction to other Japanese beetle states, but if they want to send to red or yellow states, they have to go through extensive management methods to make sure that those plants are Japanese beetle free. And that's not easy to do. These are things like pot dunks or raising plants indoors in sealed areas where they know the Japanese beetle is not going through. They also have to be inspected for Japanese beetle. So it would be huge. It would be an enormous increase of costs and an enormous, huge impact to our nursery industry in the state, where right now we're able to pretty much send wherever we want. It would also be homeowner and landscape pest almost immediately. We're already seeing damage in the area. That would be immediately. So long term, as it spreads to other counties, other nurseries would fall under these same restrictions. We'd see exported goods and crops would have problems sending out of state and out of the country. We'd have damage to crop loss and specialty crops. And also, what's to say it wouldn't spread to other states? If it's established in the West for the first time, it follows that it'll be in California, Idaho, and Washington. And they've been fighting just like every other Western state to keep this out. It's not just Oregon that's battling this. It's every Western state has been watching for Japanese beetle for years. So in terms of what you can do to support this project, currently it's funded for the next year, but industry getting involved with this, looking at other groups. We certainly have a lot of partner agencies in this project, too many to go through right now. But if you're interested in what's going on and how you can help, it's best to contact us to just offer support. A lot of logos go a long way on our outreach materials. If you have avenues to spread the word about the project and the importance of this, it's good to reach out to your constituents and your customers to find out, to let them know what's going on, because the more people that are sort of outraged about it and concerned about it, the bigger our project it becomes. So that does it for Japanese beetle. I'm going to pass it over to Wyatt now. I think we're actually going to take some questions about Japanese beetle before we move on.
I have 2 questions
Okay.
in the middle here. And the first one is, what are you treating with?
Oh, good question. So we're treating with a product called Acelepryn G. Chlorantraniliprole is the active ingredient. It's been used in pest eradication programs. It's a granular insecticide. The first year we only treated lawns of residences and grassy areas. The second year we treated lawns and ornamental planting beds. This next year we'll also be treating lawns, ornamental planting beds. We can't treat gardens and other edible areas. It is not labeled for that. We may also be looking at using foliar treatments of Acelepryn. We've done that for other eradications. This area is so big that foliar treatments, we can't cover the whole area, but there are certainly hot spots that we could hit, and we're looking at ways to do that this next year.
Can you repeat the name of what you use just one more time?
Sure. It's Acelepryn, Acelepryn, and it's Acelepryn G, the granular version. This product was chosen not only because it's very effective, but the non-target effects, basically its effect on other insects, is very, very low, as well as its human health risks are incredibly low. It's been used for years without any ill health effects. The EPA fact sheet on this has a lot of information about the health risks. If you go to japanesebeetlepdx.info or Google Japanese beetle Oregon, you'll find our website. There's a link there to Oregon Health Authority's page on Acelepryn risks to people as well.
Another question is just one more. Is there? Are you able to speak to where Japanese beetle is located? Are there Japanese beetle in Wyoming?
Well, let's take a look at the map. So if you look at the map there, it's...
Can you scroll back to it?
Oh, sure. You're not on it right now. Map right now. Okay. So the map on there, it's a gray area, it looks like right now. It looks like it's not established in Wyoming. It is basically up to the Dakotas, and Colorado is where it's established. Colorado tried to eradicate and was able to eradicate in some areas, but overall it is established in certain areas of Denver and Pueblo right now. None of the western states have Japanese beetle established currently. British Columbia is fighting their own fight right now with a huge population that's very, very, the population is very small, but it's very dense in one park in Vancouver, British Columbia, that they're trying to eradicate. California detects it every once in a while. They had a lot of detections on planes this year through shipment, but basically it's everywhere in the eastern U.S. up to the Dakotas there.
Thank you.
Sure.
So there are maybe a couple more questions, but we'll come back to those at the end. And so we'll hand it over to talk about the gypsy moth.
All right. Well, hello again. This is Wyatt Williams from Oregon Department of Forestry, and I'm going to present on gypsy moth along with Chris. And it's a very suitable arrangement because gypsy moth is both an ag and a forest pest. And as you'll see, the state's been really successful in detecting this pest and eradicating it and saving a lot of resources, both ag and forestry, from being damaged. So quickly, just an overview of gypsy moth. There are actually several subspecies in this genus, but we're mostly concerned with 2 of them, the European and Asian gypsy moth. And regardless, those subspecies feed on a wide variety of trees and shrubs, mostly broadleaf trees and shrubs, but also conifers such as Douglas fir. There's human health concerns, which you'll see here in a few slides. And as I mentioned, we have some great tools at the state for detecting this pest at very low population densities. And so maybe as you're driving around, you've seen some of these green traps, or sometimes they're orange. And the state and its cooperators put up literally over 10,000 of these traps across the state to detect gypsy moth. And this is a map, or this is a picture from the eastern U.S. where hardwood forests have been completely defoliated by gypsy moth. And this is the stage of the insect that does the defoliating, the caterpillar stage. So large numbers of these insects can consume a lot of tree material, a lot of leaf material. And the problem is that weakens trees, which then leads to them becoming more susceptible to disease and death. And conifers in particular are more likely to die when they get defoliated. Broadleaf trees can rebound usually a couple years, still weakens them, makes them susceptible to disease and other attack by insects. But the conifers cannot withstand defoliation and they will die. So as you saw in that previous slide, outbreaks can defoliate entire forest stands. And these things become a public nuisance. So much like that slide that Chris showed with the brown marrite stink bug, gypsy moth caterpillars can crawl everywhere, especially when they start running out of food. They drop to the ground and they crawl everywhere up into your house. And some people have allergic reactions to the hairs on these caterpillars. So they cause rashes and respiratory problems. And so they become a human health concern as well. And we are really lucky that we don't have gypsy moth established in Oregon. We've been very fortunate. The state has been looking for this pest since the late 1970s. But here's a map of where it could establish. This is a map of the places in Oregon that are suitable climate for the insect and also have the appropriate amount of host material. And so one thing I want you to pull away from this slide is there's over 11 million acres of forest at risk in Oregon. And over half of those are private acres, private forest lands, such as industrial plantations, timber plantations, and small family woodlands. So these are the lands in Oregon that are threatened with gypsy moth. If we were to get gypsy moth and get established, these are the lands that would have them. So I mentioned there's a couple different subspecies, and the first one I'd like to talk about today is this European gypsy moth. And it has been established in the eastern U.S. for a long time, since 1869. This is the current distribution of the European gypsy moth in North America. And it causes a tremendous amount of losses in those states, over $800 million annually in control costs and losses to industry. And Chris mentioned this too, in the pathways, we get gypsy moth periodically in Oregon. And the way we get it is from this female right here. She lays a sticky egg mass, usually on trees, but sometimes it could be barbecue grills, patio furniture, and those household relocations come to Oregon, and that's how we get a new population started here in Oregon. So here's a graph of some of this right down here. This is the defoliation that's been occurring in the eastern U.S. inside this area since about 1970, and you'll see that it goes through these big periodic outbreaks. And so some years there are millions of acres getting defoliated in the northeastern U.S. And here's the cost for suppressing some of those outbreaks. So over $260 million were spent between 1980 and 2013 on suppressing gypsy moth populations in the northeastern U.S. So none of those costs are in the Pacific Northwest because we don't have the insect. Another great thing that our partners at the USDA are doing is the Slow the Spread program. And they use a mathematical model to optimize control efforts. They say, based on this year's climate and population trends, where is the biggest bang for our buck to control the leading front of gypsy moth? And so this is the projected gypsy moth spread with that Slow the Spread program, and it's about 3 miles per year. But without that Slow the Spread program, the projected rate of spread is 13 miles per year. And so it's providing a 4-to-1 benefit to cost ratio, and it's preventing 150 million acres from being infested over the next 30 years. So this is a great example of prevention and early detection for a rapidly expanding pest. I think I'm going to hand it over to Chris right now. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about how we've worked on this in Oregon in the past. European gypsy moth detections in Oregon are frequent. I would say they're annual. We find them over the last few years. We have not had any wide detections, but we do detect them every year in ones and twos, handfuls that show up. So we've been using synthetic pheromone traps in Oregon since 1977, putting out, if you've seen these in trees, they're often green cardboard or orange cardboard. Those are gypsy moth traps. As they say, leave them alone. We would appreciate if you continue to do so. Don't look inside to see if there's anything in there, because we have to have people checking those all the time, and we want to be able to find them. So EGM we capture every year, and really, like Wyatt said, the major pathway is people moving from infested states. When they bring barbecues with them, when they bring outdoor equipment, even just their own vehicles, moving into the state, they can bring gypsy moth with them. There are sort of checks and checklists in place for people moving out of these states like Pennsylvania, Maryland, New Jersey, that moving companies are supposed to be checking these things, and really residents are too. But a lot of times it's up to the homeowner or up to the business to make sure it's being done. And so where there are fail-safes put in, compliance is not always 100%. Since 1981 in Oregon, there have been 44 GM eradication projects that average in Oregon that ODA has spearheaded. And that's an average of 1.18 per year. So almost one per year since 1981. Not every detection leads to eradication. If we find a single moth in a trap, we don't automatically go into eradication mode. What we do is we put out a trap. If we detect a moth in that trap, we then put out what's called delimitation traps, which are higher density, and then monitor those next year. If there's more moths in there next year, then we go into eradication depending on the number. If there's no moths, that population didn't take off. One of the advantages that we have with European gypsy moth is the females don't fly. So this pest does not spread particularly fast, but certainly can with egg masses. But if it's in an area, we have a year or two to act and to make decisions about eradication. However, all of our eradication efforts have been successful. We do not have gypsy moth established in the state because of the eradication efforts for gypsy moth since 1981 and even before that. Basically what we do is we apply something called BTK, which is Bacillus thuringiensis kerstaki, to be able to battle these caterpillars. This is a graph just to show you how many traps we actually put out, and I'll show you an image of that in just a moment. There were some spikes, such as in 85 and 88, where we deployed 32,000 traps statewide when we detected 19,000 moths in Lane County. That's probably our largest eradication, and it was successful. So 19,000 moths, that seems like an impossible thing, but they did it over a few years of aerial sprays. It wasn't easy, but it was done. We don't have gypsy moth. In 1992, we put out 49,000 traps along with the USDA for Asian gypsy moth detection. Asian gypsy moth is a little bit more serious. When we do detect one moth, yes, we go into eradication mode because Asian gypsy moth has a wider host range and also has flight capacity, so it can spread more. Asian gypsy moth is not established in the United States. So if we detect Asian gypsy moth, it's because of overseas goods coming in. So for gypsy moth and AGM traps that we put out in conjunction with USDA, APHIS PPQ, this is a map showing the state for 2018 and just how many traps were put out statewide. All of those dots are a single trap. And that may look like a lot right now, but it's hard to wrap your head around. I want to show you another detail of what that means for delimitation in the area. Each of those dots is a moth trap that was checked by an individual working for ODA or USDA throughout the summer. We have a whole army of trappers that we rehire each year in the summer. They deploy the traps, they service the traps, they check them. We depend on this crew a huge amount to get our work done, and they really work very hard for us. So we really appreciate the work that they do in getting these traps out, because it's kind of heroic what they're doing. That huge dense area there follows our 2016 Asian gypsy moth eradication, which I'll tell you some details about now, but it just shows you how serious a pest Asian gypsy moth and also gypsy moth can be if we're spending this much time and effort to detect it in the state. So Asian gypsy moth, like I said, it's not established in the U.S. It's a higher risk to Oregon's resources because of its ability to fly and also because of its host range. We've detected in Oregon 4 times, most recently in 2016, and it always arrives on international vessels from areas in the world where it's established. It can come in on container ships. It can come in on steel beams, which we've seen in the past. It can come in on different types of cars, certainly, and the Port of Portland is a major risk for this. Also, the Coos Bay area, I think we detected, or we didn't, but USDA detected, or Customs and Border Protection found Asian gypsy moth eggs on shipments of wood chips. So lots of pathways for this thing to get in on. In brief, our 2016 eradication, this is a huge project, and it's sad to bring it down to one slide, but essentially we treated 9,000 acres in Portland and Vancouver for Asian gypsy moth detections in 2015. We treated in 2016. Outreach to over 90 agencies and groups. We held public open houses where people could come talk to us about the threat and also the pesticide that we were using. Like I said, it's called 4A48B. It's a biopesticide. It's a naturally occurring bacteria in the soil, but it's very effective against caterpillars. We had no impact to native species. And what that means is the pesticide that we're using, although it targets Lepidoptera, because of the phenology or the life cycle of the different caterpillars and butterflies and moths in the area, gypsy moth can be targeted because it comes out a little bit earlier. So there should be very little impact to no impact to native species. And if there is impact to those species, it's not going to drive them extinct. They can repopulate these areas. There's risk-benefit analysis that goes into all of these eradications. We have not detected gypsy moth in the area in the last 3 years of trapping, so we consider it eradicated at this point in the project a success. It was a huge amount of work on all agencies' parts to get this done, and so we're very happy about the success because we saved millions to Oregon's resource economy, and we reduced pesticide use by agencies and landowners. Forest Park, if you can imagine these things defoliating the area, what it would have done to not only pesticide use and homeowner land use in the area, but also just Forest Park is a huge point of pride for Portland and Oregon, so it would have been just cultural problem as well. Tourism could have gone down in addition to the human health risks. So lots of different ways that invasive species affect people, and lots of work that we're doing to make sure this doesn't happen.
Chris, I just want to say that this project had a huge amount of cooperation and coordination among several agencies, like as you mentioned, all the way from the federal government, obviously state Department of Agriculture and Department of Forestry, and all the way down to the local governments, the Soil Water Conservation District, City of Portland. A huge amount of cooperation to pull off something like this. And the state worked really, really well together, and it's been a success. There's been no gypsy moths detected inside that area since then.
It's true. White makes a good point. I think both of us were out there in the morning, and I said it's sort of too bad to bring down this whole project that was months of planning and execution to one slide because it was such a huge deal when it happened. But the point is, it was a success because of a lot of agencies working together and pooling resources and expertise.
Okay.
So thank you for that. One question that has come in is, you talk about a lot of different lands affected, and including private lands and industries being at risk. Where does the funding come from to do the detections and the eradications? So
it depends on the pest. For gypsy moth particularly, if we detect it, we work with USDA APHIS, and that's a federally what do they call it? Regulated pest. So there are a few pests in the country that USDA will fund projects to keep them from spreading, one of which is gypsy moth. In the case of Japanese beetle, that is not a federally restricted pest, although National Plant Board works on it. Funding for that comes from emergency funds and from other sources. So for the latest Japanese beetle eradication, all of that money, we go to the e-board and we explain the problem and what funding we need for this project, and basically the legislature makes a decision whether or not they're going to fund it. They have funded it for the last 2 years, and it's projected to be funded for the next 2 years also. But it's something that we keep on going back and asking for that.
Yeah, for regular surveys, the state receives money through the Farm Bill, and so that the agency that gets that money for the survey portion is ODA. And they distribute traps. I know forestry has done that, but local cooperators have done it. But the bulk of it is done by our good partners here at ODA through the survey. And what Chris said, when we find a detection, 2 different parts of the USDA split off right there. And so if it's a European gypsy moth, usually the Forest Service provides some funding to help out with the eradication. If it's an AGM, the Asian gypsy moth, which is not established in the U.S., then APHIS traditionally helps support eradication events. And both of those, the Forest Service and the APHIS, whether it's for EGM or AGM, support about 50% of the eradication costs. And then the state has to make up the other 50%, and that's done through the e-board.
Thank you. We'll put some of these questions up online after the fact, just so that some of this is in writing with the acronyms and all of that. And you can follow up on the Oregon Invasive Species Council website, and we'll follow up with all attendees with that link. But one more question about gypsy moth. We have a participant who feels that they may have seen a gypsy moth, and what do you recommend that people do if they feel that they have found one or have detected a moth? And are there traps available? What's the cost? What are the programs available to people to help support this detection effort?
Well, I'll let Chris answer the traps portion since ODA runs that. But I will say something about people can report any invasive species, whether it's a gypsy moth or a noxious weed. The state has a reporting hotline, and we're going to talk about it at the very end of today. But it's the Oregon Invasives hotline, Oregon Invasives online hotline. So if you Google search that, and we have a web address at the end of today's slide, but you can report any invasive species on that, including gypsy moth.
In terms of traps, we have our trapping regime out there. Certainly, if you would like a trap on your property, you can reach out to the Insect Pest Prevention and Management Program. We'll get you in touch with whoever is the field office for that area, because a lot of our trapping relies on people allowing us to put traps on their property. So if someone wants to do that, it helps us out a ton. Anytime you have a question about something you found, whether it's an invasive species or if it's just something you're curious about, because we're a state agency and we have incredible taxonomic expertise for and able to ID insects, we can do that. You can submit a form online with a picture of it. You can call us and describe it. We appreciate pictures. Best thing to have is the actual specimen, but one of the services as a state agency we offer is free insect identification, and that's for anyone. That's for homeowners. That's for industry. We want you to be able to make informed management decisions about it, and also if you've detected new invasive species like spotted and lanternfly, I'll talk about, we want to know about it as soon as possible.
Yeah, I should mention that hotline that I talked about. It goes to all the natural resource agencies. So whether you submit something directly to one of our agencies, like ODA, ODF, or you could submit it to this online hotline and all the agencies can see it that way.
Great. Thank you. So we'll post that link here momentarily and after the fact. One more quick question. Can you just clarify what the e-board is?
The e-board is basically, and I might have the details about this wrong because I don't handle that part of it myself, but the e-board is the emergency board. And so each year in each, I guess, legislative session, different agencies can go and sort of,
I think they meet quarterly, and agencies can submit a request to hear, I guess, a request for funding before the e-board at these quarterly meetings. They're emergency funding from the state legislature.
Yeah, and I believe most of those emergency board funds come from lottery, but I don't know the source of them. I know that for the Japanese beetle, those are lottery funds that are being used.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Next up, we will be talking about spotted lanternfly.
So I'll be talking about spotted and lanternfly today. This is a pest that the USDA wants everyone to know about. Meg Robbie, our collaborator at USDA APHIS PPQ, unfortunately couldn't join us for the presentation today. Hopefully she's on the line watching the webinar. She is currently part of the...
As a citizen.
As a citizen, yeah. Right. So as part of the shutdown. So hopefully it'll be over soon and she'll be able to get back to work.
Thanks, Meg, for all your help on this.
Yes, thank you very much. So I'm going to talk to you guys about spotted lanternfly, something I learned quickly about as I threw this together, but was very alarmed about. Lacorma delicatula is a fulgurid, a lanternfly in the family Hemiptera, which means it's a piercing and sucking feeding insect, a lot like brown marmorated stink bug or aphids or other things that eat sort of plant sap. Native to China, Vietnam, and India, it was introduced into Pennsylvania in 2014, so a very recent introduction. It's a potential pest of hops, grapes, hardwoods, nursery plants, and more. It's got a pretty wide host range, and we're already starting to see damage of it in the U.S. The largest population is currently in Pennsylvania, but it's been detected in New York, Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, Virginia, and also intercepted in Hawaii recently on a package of tile, is what I had emailed to me from a guy in Hawaii. Very distinctive looking insect, at least from an entomological standpoint. The nymphs there, the immature stage is shown in the bottom picture there, very distinctive red and black coloration. The adult shown there, it's spread there and pinned, so you might not see that underside, but certainly that the pink wings with those dots, a little bit Lisa Frankie or sort of 80s, 90s looking style to it. If you see that, let us know. This is a quick overview of the life cycle. The adults are present in July through December. They'll lay their eggs on surfaces similar to gypsy moth. Hard to see, and I'll show some better pictures of the eggs in a moment. But those are the stage we'd be seeing now if they were around in Oregon throughout the winter. Those hatch out in the spring, and you have those nymph stages. There's 3 different stages, or rather 4 different instars or immature stages of this pest. I believe all of them feed and can cause damage, and then they turn into adults again in July and fly around. 1 generation per year for this pest is estimated in the United States climates. This is another image to show the egg masses, because this is the part that people are going to be having to search for, because like gypsy moth, they can lay their eggs on lots of different surfaces and be transported very easily. So the upper left picture shows a spotted lanternfly laying eggs there. It's sort of like a foam that comes out and hardens. And then the bottom image there shows some mature eggs that have partially hatched out. So the egg masses themselves sort of change over time and can look different ways. So you're not always just looking for one thing if you're searching for these. But if you can imagine, finding an egg mass like that on a tree trunk or underneath bark would be incredibly difficult to do, which is why this thing's been so hard to contain. So already in that picture there kind of shows why we're concerned about this and how fast this population can move. That tree is absolutely covered in lanternfly right there. Damage reported to basil, blueberry, cucumber, and horseradish in 2017. Pennsylvania has a lot of different crops in us. Their main agricultural product is milk. And so if this were to get into Oregon, we have a lot of specialty crops. That's the bulk of our industry is specialty crops. Our major agricultural products are beef cattle, but also nursery is $900 million. So these could be spread very easily throughout the nursery industry, and also seeing damage from that, in addition to specialty crops like hops, wine, grapes, and other things. It makes use of over 70 host plants, but one of the things against us and for it is that it prefers tree of heaven, which is Paulownia tomentosa. It itself is invasive, and we have that all over Oregon. It was spread by railroad being put out, and also spread different ways that invasive species are spread. So one of the invasive plants that's its main host and preferred is also everywhere. So there's a whole host pool for it to feed on. This is a picture of it on an apple tree. You can see all those adults ganging up there and feeding on that tree, and also on grapes down here along that grapevine. If it's not damaging the grapes directly, certainly that could be an issue if they're in the grapes for wine taint. If it gets into the crush, who knows what those taste like? I know for brown marmorated stink bug, that's a huge problem. I was part of a research study that showed the effect on the taste of wine for stink bugs, and I'm sure the same effect would be for lanternfly, and that it would just absolutely ruin the wine. So what is Pennsylvania doing to stop this spread? They're currently enforcing a quarantine for the movement of goods. And this is one of the things that we really want to emphasize is what does it mean to live in a quarantine for businesses and residents in the area? This quarantine, like I said, restricts the movement of goods in or out of the infested area, which is currently 13 counties in Pennsylvania. This doesn't just affect growers. This is all businesses that move things in or out of the area. This is a huge deal for any truck or any car that's moving in or out of that infested area. There's a permit training for this. If you just Google spotted lanternfly permit, you would be able to find all the information about this online and really what the courses are. What's good about the permit, I think the thing they're doing that's really good is they're showing not only the life stages and what it looks like and what to search for, but they also have suggestions on land management. So if your land that you're responsible for has lots of Paulownia tomentosa on it, this host plant, get rid of it. The picture there shows one of the permits for the trucks in the area. So what does it mean to live in quarantine? Well, this is directly from the website. For businesses, agencies, and organizations, you need a spotted lanternfly permit for people working in the area who move vehicles, products, or other conveyances in the quarantine. That's pretty broad, and it's broad by design. I'll show you a list of the things in just a moment. But like I said, it's 13 counties in the quarantine in Pennsylvania. And also, this means huge delays in moving ag products out of the state. If you have fresh product that goes bad quickly and it's held up because it has to be inspected, you could lose that. Fresh cherries, fresh berries, things like that have a very short shelf life. If it's sitting in a truck in the spring because it has to be inspected, it could go bad quickly. I'm not going to read this whole slide, but I just want you to glance over what this means. I mean, outdoor household articles, including RVs and furniture covers, firewood of any species, landscaping, construction waste. Basically, if it's a noun and it's in the area, it can't be moved out of the area if it's made of matter. So these things can be spread so easily because of eggs, and they lay them all over the place, that the restriction is going to be huge for anybody living in that space. And that's really the point we're trying to drive home. For residents, there's a compliance checklist. So if you're camping or you're moving out of the area, you have to check the stuff for spotted lanternfly eggs. And they're asking you to do this because, like they said, it's everyone's responsibility to stop moving invasive species. And then finally, it's a nuisance pest as well, not only because of having to check all your stuff for these eggs, but this is a sticky tape on the side of it, just showing how many nymphs there really are and what these populations mean. This quote from Penn State University News, in that it's become a regular fixture on the front page of their newspapers, social media feeds, and sometimes even their dreams. I think front page of their newspapers, both literal and figurative. You can't go outside without these things flying around. In addition, renders outdoor areas unusable from the honeydew that they excrete. So not only the feeding damage, but also their frass leads to sooty mold, frass being the technical term for insect poop. You can see in this picture here all that sticky resin on the leaves from those nymphs feeding. Not just a problem for folks in Pennsylvania, though. It also means that anybody trying to get goods out of the state, Delaware, Virginia, New York, really anywhere in the country trying to get stuff, it might be delayed because they have to do these restrictions, and costs go up because of that. So anyone doing business in Pennsylvania also could be subject to quarantine and compliance agreements if they're bringing stuff in from there. So this affects a lot of people right now. So another point we're trying to drive home, if you think you see spotted lanternfly, definitely report it. Call USDA APHIS PPQ, snap a picture of it, grab it. It can be identified from the wing. So if you have to kill it, kill it. Call the ODA, the Department of Agriculture. You can contact Insect Pest Prevention and Management. If you contact any of us, it'll get to the right place. 1-866-INVADER is the number that Wyatt was discussing before, of how you can sort of report invasive species on the hotline. Also, talk to your Oregon State University Extension and Master Gardeners. Other states have extension agents too. If you're joining us from other states, reach out to them, and they will be able to do insect ID, or at least get someone who can. And then Oregon State Master Gardeners is an incredible resource that we have in the state. It is an army of people that are dedicated to keeping the state's resources safe, and they are, if you can contact them, or if you're a part of them, take calls about this and get it to the right person. But the resources are there to report invasive species, and we really encourage you to take advantage of them. So that's all I have on spotted lanternfly. If there are questions about them, I'll do my best to answer them, but I am not a lanternfly expert by any means.
Well, first, one clarification. I think there may have been a mistake in the name of Tree of Heaven being Ailanthus.
Oh, it is. It's Ailanthus. Sorry. Yeah, I said Pelonia.
Yes. So just to clarify, we
Sure.
had some good support online for that to back us up. It's a collaborative effort. Everyone, thank you for that.
What's Pelonia? It doesn't matter. So.
Empress Tree.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Empress Tree.
There are a couple questions we can get to that may not be explicitly that you may be able to answer. Do we have an idea of where spotted lanternfly came from?
I don't know its point of introduction. I assume it was brought in on containers, like other pests that are brought in. I don't know if the point source is known. Certainly, if you were to search on the Pennsylvania state page about spotted lanternfly, they would have the most up-to-date information on it. I know Penn State Extension has good resources, and also the state of Pennsylvania with the permitting PowerPoint they have and the permitting information. The info is probably there, but I'm not sure.
We will we'll follow up after the fact with some answers to that, since Meg was unable to join us today, but it did come through in Pennsylvania, so you mentioned.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're getting some online support in association with Tile and Stone in Pennsylvania. So we'll confirm all of those details and post those after the fact.
Great.
But another general question is that a participant says, I'm reading that globally, on a global perspective, insect populations are dropping, causing concern in many cases. Are we seeing the same type of drop with invasive species, or has there been sort of an impact on invasive species trends?
I know of that study and the studies that are being done about insect populations being going down. We have not seen that. I can't speak to that, but we're not seeing any decrease in invasive species. If anything, we're seeing it go up, at least in the last few years. A lot of different population curves and things like that are happening. You know, and with climate change, we don't know what we're going to see with populations increasing in areas, but we only expect invasive species pest pressure to go up with the increased movement of goods. Things like Amazon Prime and other places that can do next day sales and ship their own airlines through different places.
Yeah, I agree. It's if anything, invasive species incidences are going up, and that's all because of human activity, international trade and commerce and travel. And also, invasive species are unique, as Chris mentioned in the very beginning. They are unique. They're novel to an environment. A lot of times, the plants have not evolved defenses against those novel enemies, and so they can gain a foothold very quickly. We're not seeing populations of invasive species go down. We're only seeing new invasive species come into our area.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, though, and I think it'd be worth investigating, like to a study to see like how does that affect specific species? Because the studies are very broad right now with like flying insects. So what impact it has on this, I think would be great. So good point.
Moving on to the final pest topic with emerald ash borer.
Okay, and it's our final module today, emerald ash borer, which is a major threat to ash forests in the U.S. and here in Oregon. And so the background behind emerald ash borer, it was first detected in the U.S. in 2002, just outside Detroit, Michigan. And the pathway that we think how it arrived to the U.S. Was through the Great Lakes shipping corridor. And we think it came on pallets with untreated ash with bark intact. And it started population in the Great Lakes area. And since 2002, when it was first detected, it's killed over 100 million trees, 100 million ash trees in over 30 states. And so far, it's the costliest invasive forest pest in the U.S. at $1.7 billion and counting. And so here's a map. The blue line is the federal quarantine for EAB, and those red dots are initial county detections. So EAB is in a lot of other areas besides these red dots. Those are just the initial county detections. But again, 2002, one county in Michigan, and by 2019, 33 states now. And the furthest west it is just outside Denver, Colorado. And so technically, it's about a day's drive from here to Oregon. Back in the epicenter, in some counties in Michigan, over 95% of the ash has been killed, and there's no native seed bank. And so the ash that are growing, they'll get attacked and they'll likely die as well. And we know that EAB is spreading through firewood, and it can also be spread through nursery stock as well, ash nursery stock. One thing I want to point out is there's absolutely no stopping emerald ash borer once it gets established. So there's been over 20 eradication attempts in the eastern U.S., sponsored by the federal government and state governments, and all of those have failed. But I do want to stress that you can protect individual trees through systemic insecticides. So this is a real thing down here where you can inject trees and the insecticide will travel up and down the vascular system and protect that tree. But you have to reapply this every couple of years, and it can get very costly. So not practical on widespread forests, but you can protect individual trees. So what's our threat, or what's our risk, I guess, out here in Oregon? The risk is that we have a native and wild species of ash, the true ash, Fraxus latifolia. It's Oregon's only native species. And it's a very important riparian tree on the West Coast. It provides shading over streams and stabilizes the banks. And it also provides habitat for a T&E species like salmon and steelhead, and a couple native plants and Columbia white-tailed deer. So T&E species rely on those habitats provided by Oregon ash. There's also a small market for wood products derived from ash, from Oregon ash. And it's also important for Native Americans. It's an important cultural resource. So Oregon ash has already been severely fragmented, especially in the Willamette Valley. But this is a very common scene right here to see a stand of Oregon ash, either in the foothills of the Willamette Valley or in the Willamette Valley itself. And but once you get inside a small stand like this, there's an incredible amount of understory plant diversity and wildlife. So this is inside this tiny little stand. It's like a completely different ecosystem, and it supports all types of species. So here's an elk. So who would have thought that you could find Roosevelt elk in the middle of the Willamette Valley in one of these Oregon ash stands? So provides a unique opportunity for cover for wildlife, fish, and plants. But the cost of EAB can be split into ecological and environmental. So the ecological cost, it changes stream temperatures, stream sediment, and habitat. So here's a riparian corridor from the eastern U.S., and all these ash trees are dead or almost dead. And it's changing the way that stream functions. And there's also the economic. So in cities, it's very costly to remove some of these ash trees. For instance, in the city of Portland, there's a street tree inventory. These are just public ash trees. There's 72,000 public ash trees. And if you put the numbers through a little calculator, average about $290 per tree to remove and about $400 to replace it. That's $50 million cost to Portland for removing all those dead ash trees. And they will die in relatively quick time span. We're talking 4 to 8 years. They will die. So hold on to your ash. Here's the costs of emerald ash borer. And I want to say this is kind of an older reference here, 2011, but this is where that $1.7 billion in cost comes from. Over $850 million has been on local governments. So $850 million cost to local governments, $380 million from property value losses. And I'm going to show you a graph of that. $350 million to landowner costs. Here's the timber industry and federal government. So here's a couple dramatic pictures of what it means to lose property value from emerald ash borer. So here's a nice ash-lined street. We have streets like this in Portland and other communities in Oregon. This is in 2006 before EAB hit. And then 3 years later, that same street. Okay, this is not fall. This is the middle of the summer here. So other trees that are not ash are survived, but those large trees have died. And so what might have been a $350,000 house right here, this is no longer a $350,000 house. And so that's where those property values come into play. So what's Oregon doing for EAB? Well, I'm proud to announce that we're the first state on the West Coast to have an official plan for emerald ash borer. And after a year of planning meetings, Oregon Department of Forestry, Oregon Department of Agriculture, in conjunction with the Oregon Invasive Species Council, and several federal agencies and local agencies, we came up with a plan. And you can find that plan here at oregoneab.info. And it's nice because it already defines the roles of the stakeholders, which agencies are doing what in case we get EAB. We have a section on the readiness. We have a section on the response. We even have press releases ready to go. We have an IPM fact sheet. So please take a look at that resource. Here's the risk map. So this is where we think emerald ash borer can get established in our state. This is where Oregon ash grows and also where some planted ash occur. And what other actions are we doing as a state? Well, we have this Oregon Forest Pest Detector Program, and that's a cooperative of ODF, ODA, OSU, and USDA. We've trained 500 people. These are professionals on the ground on how to look for emerald ash borer. We also do statewide trapping. So this is a trap for emerald ash borer. And believe it or not, folks, we are starting to collect Oregon ash seeds because we think that once we get this, it's going to wipe through our native Oregon ash. And now's the time to start gene banking and conserving that species. So this year, we're starting to collect ash seeds. So I think I'm running out of time here, but I just wanted to, the main points are EABs rapidly expanding across the U.S. There's high costs expected here in government, or in Oregon, to government and property owners. There's going to be impacted native ecosystems. And another thing about quarantines right now, Oregon nurseries, we don't have quarantines for EAB. So Oregon and California are one of the last, and Washington are one of the last few states that can produce ash trees and ship them out without quarantine. So it's roughly 30 nurseries in 30 nurseries in Oregon that produce ash trees. And we don't have quarantines for EAB, but that would change if we would get it. Okay, so that's EAB. I can answer any questions about that.
Thanks, Wyatt. There was a question about if we're using names like the chemicals, if we can repeat that. and knowing where people are using that.
Yeah, so I can say some of those chemicals right now, but for EAB in particular, if you go to the website that has the plan, the OregonEAB.info, one of the appendices is an IPM guide, Integrated Pest Management. So it lists the chemicals already listed for controlling emerald ash borer. But I'll just quickly tell you, it's a imidacloprid, which is a neonic, and emamectin benzoate. Both of those offer really good control, and but you have to reapply every 1 to 3 years. But if you want those spelled out, I suggest people visit the OregonEAB.info.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Someone wants to know who do we talk to about collaborating on ash seed collection?
Oh, okay, well, that would be me, Wyatt. And so my agency, Oregon Department of Forestry, applied for funding from the Forest Service to do native ash seed collection, and we're going to start that work this late summer and fall when the samaras, the fruits, start to ripen. We're going to collect those. So we're looking for local cooperators, and if you'd like to help out, please send me an email, wyatt.williams@oregon.gov.
Great. So we can, I think, wrap it up here and answer any. There's a few more questions for the end.
Okay. Thanks for hanging in there, folks. Just got a few slides here to close. And one thing, if it hasn't been apparent already, is that invasive species cost a lot to our economy here in Oregon, but also to the U.S. And so actually over $120 billion annually is the cost of invasive species in the U.S. And we haven't even talked about noxious weeds at all, but because we don't have the time to, but that noxious weeds and things like the insects we're talking about, they change complete ecosystems, irreversibly change them. And they alter natural resource productivity. So the products that we are producing here, the nursery products, the timber products, they could get changed forever. And invasive species are also a big ecosystem threat. They are the leading cause of species extinctions. They're second leading cause worldwide. 44% of the threatened and endangered species in the U.S. are at risk of going extinct due to invasive species. And this kind of gets to the point that someone asked about earlier. How about invasive insects? Are they kind of going down? And so, no, we haven't seen that trend. So here on the x-axis is time in the U.S. since 1600s all the way up to current time. And this is the cumulative number of pests. The blue line is all non-native forest insects. And so about every 2 years, we get 5 new exotic insects in our forests. Those are just exotic insects in our forests in the U.S. We get 5 new ones every 2 years. And every 2 years, we get 1 new invasive species, like sudden oak death, emerald ash borer. We get 1 new invasive species every 2 years in our forest. So they're continuing to arrive. And one example that just came about, maybe you've heard about this, but within the last couple of weeks, there was a new pest that was detected in Oregon on the West Coast. It's the elongate hemlock scale. And it's an exotic pest from Europe, I believe. It's been established in the eastern U.S. where it is a major pest of hemlock. Hemlock is our second leading timber producing species here in Oregon. Douglas fir is number 1, hemlock is number 2. And so we don't want this thing established here. It also has a huge impact on agriculture too. So it is a big Christmas tree pest. We have a thriving Christmas tree industry here. So this is a good example of a pest that came in and there was excellent coordination and communication among the agencies and rapid response. Those trees were destroyed and threat was averted for now, we hope. So here's some other tools that the state has for invasive species management. We talked about these and I just want to highlight them. We have prevention programs. And I should mention state agencies and the federal government both partake in these 3 main things here. The prevention, that's where commodities are inspected. We have import-export permits. We have things like the boat stations for zebra mussel. Next line of defense is the early detection and rapid response. Sometimes we like to throw out acronyms, EDRR, so early detection, rapid response. And that's the whole philosophy where we find them early and we eradicate them. Well, we can still minimize the costs. One example of that is the gypsy moth, where we put literally tens of thousands of traps across the state. We also rely on landowners to call us, the public to call us, and we can respond to those technical assists. But all of this is really done through a high level of coordination and public engagement. And I want to give credit to our Oregon Invasive Species Council. They help bring all the agencies together, the federal agencies, state agencies, and local agencies. And so one of the tools from the Oregon Invasive Species Council is this online hotline that I mentioned earlier. And here's that website, Oregon Invasives Hotline. So summary points from today: there are several pests that threaten ag and forestry industries, and they're on the horizon. We covered 4 of them today, but we could cover others too. But those are the 4 that we decided to present to you today. Prevention and the EDRR program are the best bangs for the buck, and have a couple citations here. The benefit to cost ratios for these programs are tremendous. So for every dollar you put in, you get up to $17 or $34 back in benefits for prevention and EDRR. We also hope that today's webinar provided you with awareness of ongoing efforts that the state and federal agencies and local governments are providing you regarding these new pests. And we want you to know that we're here to help and support you. This is the Oregon Invasive Species Council, and these are all the current member agencies of the council. And we stand in solidarity with a common goal to protect Oregon. We're here to help and support your industry, your clientele, and your stakeholders. So please let us know how we can serve you in regards to invasive species. And thank you for listening today.
Thank you both for that presentation. We're at an hour for the webinar. We wanted to set aside a little bit of extra time for some questions, and we do have a few. So if any of you are on the line and able to spend a few more minutes with us, Chris and Wyatt are here to answer some more questions. So the first question is about gypsy moths, and a participant asks or mentions that it looks like tent caterpillar, and wants to know what is the difference, and can people tell the visual difference?
Well, first of all, it doesn't create tents like tent caterpillar, so that's a good one. And then I don't know if we can go back quickly.
You might be able to.
But there's a characteristic pattern on the caterpillar, of the blue dots and the red dots, and so we don't have any native caterpillars that have that. I should say, both ODA and ODF, we have fact sheets on our websites on how to identify gypsy moth, but here's the pattern I'm talking about. I don't know if they can see my screen. Yeah.
Yes.
All right. So there's I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pairs of blue dots and 6 pairs of red dots. And so you'll see this on the later growth stages of the caterpillar.
You're right. I mean, they do seem similar. Wyatt's point about they don't create tents, so you won't see that webbing from gypsy moth. A lot of gypsy moth gets used as a term for a lot of pests back east, I think, because I've had people say, "Oh, we used to call those tent caterpillars gypsy moth where I came from," and that could be true. But when we say gypsy moth, we're specifically talking about Limantia dispar, these pests. So if you ever concerned, or you have tent caterpillar that you're worried about too, because there are some that can be damaging, let us know, and we can either send someone out from a field office or take a picture, and we can usually give you an idea of what it is from there, especially this time of year. So
the adults are kind of hard to identify, and they are attracted to these traps. No other moths are going to get attracted to the gypsy moth pheromone. But in this picture over here, we have the white one is the female, the brown one is the male. We have a lot of brown moths in Oregon, so we get a lot of brown moth pictures. But there are some characteristics. I don't need to go into them right now. But if you go to our fact sheets, it can kind of point out the nuances on the adults. But send us pictures. When in doubt, send us pictures or the specimens, and we can identify them for you.
Just really emphasize how hard it is to identify gypsy moth. We think we're pretty good at it, and we when we do the traps and we get them at the end of the season, they're checked over by text, they're checked over by a taxonomist. If we think we have a gypsy moth, we then send that to what's called the OISC lab in USDA, so that they can do a genetic test to make sure, one, it's gypsy moth, and also that it's either European or Asian gypsy moth. So it goes through a lot of checks. So, at a glance, if we see a brown moth, we don't collect them all, but we make sure the determination is correct, and it's actually this pest particularly.
Great, thank you. So how can someone that is maybe moving from Oregon, or knows someone that's moving, not moving from Oregon, moving to Oregon, or knows someone who's moving to Oregon from an infested area, avoid bringing these pests?
Depending on what the pest is, if it's gypsy moth, I guess overall, look at what you're bringing with you. Check cars, inspect it for anything that looks out of the ordinary. That brown worm, stink bug, and Japanese beetle and these other things can get into crevices, and egg masses are laid on these surfaces. So really inspect vehicles and the outsides of trucks for these things, and just be careful about anything that was outside for an extended period of time. If it's something like Japanese beetle that can be transported very easily in the larval stage in soil, do not bring your potted plants with you. It's as simple as that. It's just not a good idea to move potted plants and plants around the states. Nurseries, especially in Oregon, are subject to strict inspections, and they have to be they've got phytosanitary certificates that show that they're pest free before they're shipped out of the state. And a lot of other states have these restrictions as well, and so they're licensed and inspected annually for pests and things like that. Individuals can't do that, so it's just best not to bring it. These things are very hard to see. In some cases, not even ones that we didn't talk about are microscopic and can be transported. Disease as well.
I was just on ODA's website yesterday and looking at some information, and they have a great FAQ on if you are a company and you want to import commodities to Oregon, or if you want to get a phytosanitary certificate. So I really think ODA is a good website for answering a lot of those questions on what to bring and how to bring it in safely. The other thing I want to say is that Oregon's on the map, kind of worldwide even. So again, through the Oregon Invasive Species Council, some of those member agencies, the Oregon State University and ODA were successful in getting a Farm Bill grant. And so we have this program called Don't Pack a Pest. It's called Don't Pack a Pest. And it's for international students who are coming to the state. And it tells them what they shouldn't bring in terms of invasive species threats. So we're getting our message out overseas right now on behalf of Oregon and educating people on what is safe and what is not safe to bring.
One other point: if you're moving from out of state, and there's somebody there, have them, depending on the state, talk to local extension and see what the pests are that are they could possibly move. One of the things that comes up is people don't realize that some of these things are only established in the eastern U.S., like gypsy moth and Japanese beetle. They think they're everywhere. So if they chat with them and say, "Oh yeah, we've got this new thing, spotted lanternfly," or even this new thing that we heard about a week ago, like hemlock elongate scale. Reach out to those agencies and find out, because they're there to talk about the prevention of spreading pests and want to help. So I think every extension agent I've ever met is very enthusiastic about the idea of going out and checking plants and then doing these inspections, because basically we're all bug nerds at heart. So.
Awesome. There's a couple questions here about the use of pesticides, and I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to how you make decisions about the use of pesticides, how you collaborate with other agencies about the use of pesticides, how you decide on one, maybe using the integrated pest management, or how you're really thinking about the broader kind of like public safety and health of bees and other insects and things
right.
in your work.
Well, that's a really good question. And so all the state agencies follow integrated pest management, where we consider all tools in the toolbox. One of those is certainly pesticides, but there's cultural tools, there's a mechanical control, there's other things besides chemicals. And we definitely employ integrated pest management. That's a philosophy and working guidelines for all of our agencies. One example I can pull from is the 2016 gypsy moth eradication, and this will happen too if we get gypsy moth again or emerald ash borer, we'll convene a technical working group. And before anything is done, we convene a technical working group, the stakeholders, the agencies involved, and we talk about options for control. And so with the 2016 gypsy moth, there are alternatives out there. And we selected as a team, an organically labeled biopesticide. And we went to the public and presented our plan at open houses and even mailings, interviews with the media. And so it's an interactive process, and we incorporate public comment, but it's all structured around integrated pest management and overall safety to the environment while protecting resources. So it's a long process, but it's one that we do thoroughly at the state.
to add to that, Wyatt's absolutely right. I think we don't take any eradication or any pesticide use lightly. I don't think it's why any of us got into the job was to start spraying pesticides. I certainly didn't. My background is in biological control and actually reducing pesticide use, and that's why I got into agricultural and applied entomology. With eradication products that we choose, we take into consideration, like he said, effect on the environment, effectiveness against the pest, but first and foremost, human health and where we're going to be applying this, and also environmental and wildlife health. So in the case of Japanese beetle for eradication, the product that we chose, the Celiprin G, what came from a technical working group. We met with representatives from states that had this established with California and other experts in the field back in 2016. Literally during that snowpocalypse that happened is when we were meeting to talk about this, so I can pinpoint the hour for you that we were talking about it. And we chose that product. It's not the only one out there, but it's and there are certainly things that are much harsher or broad spectrum or affect more different insects. But this one is not only effective against the grub, it's very low health risk to people, pets, and wildlife. And so that is taken into consideration in that. Before we start doing anything. So we get public feedback and we alert them. We also work with Oregon Health Authority, the National Pesticide Information Center, NPIC, and also our own, and another group, Pesticide Action Resource Committee, PARC. I might have that acronym.
Pesticide Analytical Response.
Yeah, Pesticide Analytical Response Committee, PARC, P-A-R-C. We work with them to consider this. So IPM techniques, and also just what can we use to get the job done safely. And
getting back to the gypsy moth, the 2016 Asian gypsy moth eradication, there is so much known about the biology of gypsy moth. There's actually a model out there that will predict when the best time to spray this organic pesticide. And so we here in Oregon followed that, and we plugged in our climate data, and it will give a day-to-day prediction on the 3-day window when it's best to apply this pesticide. And so that is an example of IPM, using all the tools at your disposal. Along with that, we had Sentinel egg masses. We had eggs that we brought here from the eastern U.S. and put them in a cage, and we monitored them every day to check on their emergence, so we could time our spray perfectly. Another thing I thought was great that ODA did, they did a biodiversity study before and after the 2016 gypsy moth eradication. So they looked for native caterpillars that might have been affected, and they did a population census and a species count inside the spray and right adjacent to the spray area before and after the treatment. And they showed that there was no effect on these sprays on the native butterflies and moths. So we're very concerned about it, and we take every caution necessary when we deal with pesticides, and we use this holistic approach of IPM.
And I would also note that pollinators are very important to the state, and to look at the Oregon Bee Project as well as a resource for the collaborative effort around these.
Yeah, it's a new collaboration that we're excited to be part of. I know ODA, ODF, several agencies are on this, OSU leading it, and so the Oregon Bee Project is a great effort. Encourage people to go check that out, and it's all about supporting and maintaining our native pollinators.
So we talked a lot about the hotline. There's an online hotline. There's a phone number that you can call. There are a lot of resources from individual agencies where you're always looking to hear from people if they think that they detect something. We encourage you to go use those resources, particularly the hotline. It will be redirected to experts like you all to respond. Can you speak a little bit to what do you suggest people do to report if they're not sure that it's invasive?
Oh, I'd say send it anyway. We get so many requests for identifications at the ODA through our lab. I really like getting them. I get emails that pop up and it's like, what spider is this? First and foremost, I think, or number one, we get a lot of requests about spider identification because there's a lot of fear or unwarranted fear, in our opinion, over spiders in Oregon. If you are just curious about what it is, knowledge is power, and the more you know about the diversity and biodiversity and different things we have in Oregon, the better. If it happens to be an invasive species, great that you submitted it. But if you're just curious about stuff that's in your garden, any pest, send it along. One of the things that I like about working here is that we can offer our expertise to anybody. And so I talked to somebody for 25 minutes this afternoon, or rather this morning, about box elder bug and what possible things there are to combat that. And it was a very good conversation that went into all sorts of different pests on their property, but it helped to make informed decisions about what to do in terms of management. Did they need to spray for it? Probably not. So I'm reducing pesticide use through knowledge, and so are they. They're saving money and protecting the environment.
Yeah, I agree with Chris. We're all very enthusiastic and passionate about what we do. We all have advanced degrees in entomology, botany, pathology. So we have mushroom nerds, we have plant nerds, bug nerds. Please send your photos. I just want to keep pushing the Oregon hotline, the online hotline, because that makes a record of something. And what Chris said too was someone might send in, this is foxglove, a plant. Foxglove is an exotic plant, but now everyone that logs in and looks at that can say, oh, foxglove, and here's all the answers on what I need to know for this, or Scotch broom, or Himalayan blackberry, or whatever it may be. So I really like the online hotline. It provides a record, there's photos. Did you know you could upload a report within 60 seconds using your smartphone, and you don't have to have an app, and you don't have to have a username and another password. So no login, no password, no app. You can just go to the website and use your device's camera and your GPS, and within 60 seconds you can log a report. So very good tool, and all the agencies see it. So
one thing I'd like to clarify: I don't have an answer for box elder bug. Don't call us saying I think I have a magic bullet. I don't. It's the same thing. Make sure they don't get into your house, but I don't want to advertise it like, oh, this guy calls me and I told him the golden rule or whatever the thing. We don't have it.
A couple more questions to wrap us up. There is a question about the emerald ash borer readiness plan. Does it include a plan for lingering ash identification and potential breeding?
It does mention those things. Yeah, it mentions lingering ash. So lingering ash back in the Midwest and eastern states, there are pockets of ash trees that have not died from emerald ash borer, and we don't know, did they just escape those, or are they somehow immune or resistant to emerald ash borer? We don't know yet. People are just kind of still figuring this out, but those are called lingering ash. And so we're looking for that for sudden oak death and tan oak too. We're looking for lingering tan oak right now, and trying to collect acorns and propagate these trees in an offsite nursery and start breeding resistance into the population of tan oak. And so for Oregon ash, we're starting to do that right now by collecting native seed. Right now, we don't have emerald ash borer. We can go anywhere in the state and collect seed where we get permission to do so, and then we can store that seed long term. And the hope is that in the future, when we have the resources and the desire, we can pull those seeds out of long-term storage, start propagating them. We can do resistance experiments, breeding programs, and replanting and restoration programs. So that was one of the lessons learned from the eastern U.S. Well, all the states that are dealing with emerald ash borer. I just got back from Maryland, and I saw emerald ash borer. It was in every single ash tree. I went to the very first ash tree, emerald ash borer, and every tree after that had emerald ash borer. And so one of the lessons learned from eastern states was, oh my gosh, this thing ran through our ash so fast, and we didn't collect seed, and ash doesn't survive very long in the seed bank, in the natural seed bank. So we wish we would have collected seed. And we took that lesson learned on the national stage, and now we're applying it here in Oregon. We're going to get out ahead of this thing, and we're going to collect ash seed, at least have it in storage. And then as the desire and funding comes in the future, then we can start doing experiments to look for resistance and breed resistance into the population of Oregon ash.
And I posted your contact information for those that want to collaborate on that.
Great.
The next question is about relative to spotted lanternfly, and are you aware of any tree of heaven removal programs or funding sources? How should people work with you all to remove tree of heaven?
Good question. I don't know of any in terms of tree of heaven removal projects for Oregon. It's an invasive species. I don't know if there's projects in place here yet, even though it isn't an issue in the future. I don't know how to answer that. I don't know if there are anything in place in Oregon or in the Pacific Northwest for that.
Yeah, there's some best management guides on how to control it. And I don't know them, like Chris, I don't know them off the top of my head, but there are some resources out there that tell you how to control Elianthus or tree of heaven, which is the prime food for this spotted lanternfly. Luckily, again, in the eastern U.S., tree of heaven, very, very dominant. It gets to be a huge tree, and it does to extent out here in the west. So we do have tree of heaven. It is widespread, but I think tree of heaven is a lot more dominant back east. But that's just my guess on that one.
Yeah, I'm more familiar with it, despite getting the species name wrong, because of brown marmorated stink bug, and it's a popular host for that also. And so when I worked on that years ago, I saw it a lot in Portland, but maybe not.
Yeah, it is around. I see it. It is very, very widespread plant, and it's very recognizable. We should probably put a picture up here, but you can contact either one of us offline, and make sure one of us will make sure to get you the management guidelines on how to treat it and remove it.
And we'll also post some information from the Department of Agriculture's Noxious Weed program along these lines as well.
Yeah, they might be able to answer
absolutely.
better than I can anyway.
So we have time for probably one more question here. And there's a couple questions that I'm going to meld a bit. And it is to say, how can people kind of collaborate and understand how to get involved with these efforts? For example, we have someone who is a beekeeper and wants to make sure that maybe wood products like wood chips that they're using haven't been treated, or they would like to understand how to address some of these species at a bigger scale. How can they get involved with these efforts?
I have some ideas.
Sure.
So I'll start, I guess. But I would say first place to get involved is at your watershed level. There's a lot of active watershed councils, and they tend to deal with a lot of these issues. In fact, I know Chris and his shop and at my shop at ODF, we do a traveling road show, and we go talk to watershed councils about the threat from EAB and Japanese beetle. And then it starts, there's some grassroots efforts there at the local scale. But if you want to there's opportunities to get involved from the ground like that all the way up to the top. And one of the ways at the top is to join the Oregon Invasive Species Council meetings, where you can, they're public meetings, and we have 4 of them per year. And I think the next one's February 19th. Yeah. And so you can join in person, or you can join online, and you can contribute your ideas, or you can listen as we talk as state and federal agencies and local agencies on how to deal with invasive species. So Oregon Invasive Species Council, or these watershed councils, soil water conservation districts, or even just, we have volunteer opportunities. I know we have volunteer opportunities. You probably do too.
Yeah.
So,
reaching out to us and finding out, I think each situation is going to be different. So if you're looking for the source of something coming in, I would go with the supplier or reach out to us to see if we can answer those questions. But really, just get in contact with some of these groups, either ODF, USDA, and ODA. We're not unapproachable people. I think a lot of people, when I run into and talk to people in the field just with questions, they'll say things like, "Oh well, ODA, my question will never go anywhere, or my phone call won't get there." There's only like 8 of us in the office usually, and we all answer our phones if we're there, and it's actually pretty easy to get a hold of us directly, either through our website or just calling and getting redirected. So as far as the government agencies go in Oregon, they're pretty small and very approachable. We encourage people to meet us at our office with questions also, like bringing in samples. So depending on what the situation is, we can find the answer for you, and we'll work to do so. I think that's our role and our responsibility as a public agency, and we're happy to do it.
Awesome. I would also like to note that you are small agencies. You have limited capacity to do this work, and it's a really big effort. So I want to thank you for that, first of all, and also encourage everyone to report invasive species using the hotline, using IMAP Invasives, contacting you. Those reports are recorded and used as part of the larger effort, and supporting your efforts to do this work is really important for the state. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
I think that sums up our webinar here, and we'll be posting the information on the Oregon Invasive Species Council's website. we can send out to everyone who registered information about what we talked about today and some links that were noted, some of the technical words or the acronyms, and we'll hope to communicate with you again in the future.
Yeah, thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining in today.